Hi, I'm Mary Beth. And this is the story of how my mother's will didn't just divide a family, it revealed who had been watching all along. They didn't call, they didn't write. They just sent an envelope, like an invitation to a performance I was never cast in. But what cut deeper than the paper was knowing they expected me to stay silent, like always. Before we go any further, tell me, have you ever felt like an outsider in your own family? If yes, comment number 1. If no, comment number 0. This is a family drama you don't want to miss. They didn't call. They didn't write. They just sent an envelope, thick, stiff, and cream-colored, like a wedding invite for a family I wasn't part of anymore. It sat crooked under the doorframe, half shadowed by the porch light from Mrs. Crandall's house across the street. I stared at it for a long moment, boots dripping on the mat, my bag still slung over one shoulder. My knee ached from the cold and the stairs, but I didn't move. Just watched the envelope like it might vanish if I gave it time. Callie arrived 10 minutes later, smelling faintly of cinnamon and clean rain. She carried a dented tin of apple muffins and didn't even glance at the envelope before stepping inside. "You look like you just saw a tax notice," she murmured, unbuttoning her coat. "It's from Whitaker and Holt," I said, my voice low. "They sent it like I'm being summoned to a cotillion I didn't RSVP to." She didn't respond right away. The kettle was already whistling faintly on the stove, so she moved toward it and clicked it off. I peeled off my coat, folded it over the chair, and finally picked up the envelope. It was weighty in my hand, formal, cold. I thought Celeste would at least call, or text. Something. I turned it over. No personal note. No, "Hope you're holding up okay." Just an embossed return address and my full name. The same name they only ever used on legal documents or Christmas cards. Callie poured the hot water into 2 ceramic mugs. The scent of cinnamon and black tea filled the room. She wrapped her cardigan tighter around herself as she sat, nodding toward the envelope. "Are you going to open it?" I didn't answer. Instead, I opened the side drawer of my writing desk and reached for the scarf. Cream silk, faint blue thread stitched the initials J.E. into the corner. My mother gave it to me before things got distant, before Celeste started making every family gathering feel like a performance. Before the last Thanksgiving, she seated me at the folding table with the neighbor kids and called it just practical. I ran my fingers along the embroidery. My mother's voice flickered in memory, thin and worn, but still warm. "Don't let them take everything," she'd whispered one night, while I spooned soup into her lap and tried not to cry. I finally opened the envelope. One single sheet. "You are requested to attend the reading of the last will and testament of Joan Margaret Ellis." Date, November 17th, 10 a.m. Location, Whitaker and Holt offices, Renfield, Virginia. No message, no warmth, just time and place. I folded the paper carefully, slid it back in. My hands moved on their own, reaching for the scarf again. I folded it neatly, tucked it into my purse next to my checkbook and a worn grocery list. "I guess I'm still the last to know." Mary Beth turns to Callie and quietly says, "I need to go." They think I'll stay quiet, but not this time. Renfield hadn't changed, just more shutters closed, more gravel crunching under tires that didn't belong to me. The scarf sat in my purse, warm from the drive. My fingers kept reaching for it without thinking, like it had something to say I wasn't ready to hear. I parked around the back, like always, gravel whispering beneath the tires. The front was for family, or at least, the version of family that Celeste deemed presentable. The housekeeper, a woman I didn't recognize, opened the side door with a towel still in her hand. She gave me a quick once-over and said flatly, "Didn't know you'd be coming." She stepped aside without waiting for a response. I nodded politely and stepped into the scent of lemon polish and cold air conditioning. Inside, everything was as I remembered. The wooden banister still had the small chip from when Celeste slammed her suitcase against it in '94. The family photos still lined the hall, though mine, I noticed, had been replaced with a watercolor of the Blue Ridge. Voices drifted from the terrace out back. I followed the sound, pausing at the threshold just long enough to spot her. Celeste stood like she'd just stepped out of a glossy magazine. Navy heels, cream dress, a structured coat that didn't dare wrinkle. She was laughing lightly with a cousin from Norfolk, one hand resting on a glass of something sparkling. She caught sight of me almost instantly. Her smile didn't flicker, but her voice lifted just enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Didn't know we were inviting plus ones today." A few polite chuckles followed. I didn't answer, didn't even slow my step. I walked to the long garden table and found the seat at the far end, partially in the shade, partially out of the way. I smoothed my hand-me-down coat and folded my scarf across my lap. Aunt Renee, seated beside me, leaned in slightly. Her voice was soft, almost trembling. "Your mother would have wanted you here, sweetheart." "I hope so," I whisper back, eyes on the hydrangeas blooming along the stone wall. They always seem defiant, those flowers. Too blue, too bold for such a tightly curated space. Cutlery clicked, glasses clinked, conversation swelled and settled like a polite tide. Someone behind me murmured, "She's still not married?" I didn't turn, didn't need to. Celeste moved toward the front of the table just as the lawyer appeared in the doorway. But before he could speak, I caught it, her hand sliding into her purse, fingers producing a small folded paper. Smoothly, without looking down, she passed it under the table to Uncle Peter, who accepted it with practiced ease. Celeste looks up, meets Mary Beth's eyes, and smiles too sweetly. "Let's begin, shall we?" I didn't expect the lawyer to say my name first, and certainly not like that. Mr. Halston stood beneath the striped canopy, adjusting his glasses with a kind of practiced stiffness. The breeze stirred the hem of his blazer and fluttered the corners of the documents he held, but he didn't flinch. He looked like a man who'd attended too many of these readings and liked them less with each passing year. The scarf in my lap was already knotted at the edge, my hands working unconsciously, a habit from years of sitting through long board meetings and longer family dinners. I tried not to fidget, but my fingers betrayed me. "Thank you all for coming," Mr. Halston began, his voice carrying just enough over the clinks of coffee cups and a faint chorus of birdsong. "I know these moments are never easy." Celeste leaned forward in her chair, smiling sweetly as she placed her fingertips on the table. "Let's hope there are no deviations," she said, her voice coated in charm but sharpened at the edge. A few of the guests gave polite, knowing chuckles. I stayed still, my scarf twisted tighter between my fingers. Mr. Halston cleared his throat. Per the last legally binding will and testament of Joan Margaret Ellis, dated October 14th of this year, the entirety of the Ellis estate, including property, financial holdings, personal belongings, and residual income, is to be inherited by Miss Mary Beth Ellis. A teacup clinked too hard on a saucer. Someone gasped. One cousin dropped her spoon into her lap. I didn't move. Across the table, Celeste froze. Her expression didn't change immediately, but something in her posture stiffened like glass setting under heat. Slowly, she turned to me. "And," Mr. Halston continued, "a clause follows. Miss Ellis must reside in the Ellis family home for a minimum of 1 year. During this period, no sale, redevelopment, or transfer of ownership may be pursued." The wind lifted the edge of the tablecloth. Somewhere behind me, I heard the faint creak of the garden swing. "Additionally," he said, flipping a page, "Miss Celeste Ellis is restricted from initiating or facilitating any financial or structural decisions regarding the property during that period." That did it. Celeste stood abruptly, her chair skidding back with a squeal. She manipulated our mother. I'll prove it. Mr. Halston calmly responds. It was signed, notarized, and witnessed. That's what I'm prepared to show the court. Celeste had barely finished her mimosa before I got the court summons in my mailbox. It came folded and certified, the kind of envelope that made your stomach tighten before your eyes even reached the return address. I sat at the kitchen table with the letter still unopened, the kettle whistling in the background, shrill and oblivious. The late autumn light filtered through the blinds, cutting across the linoleum like stripes. Callie was already placing 2 mugs on the table when I opened it. Her cardigan sleeves were pushed up just enough to show the fading bruise from gardening gloves. She noticed the look on my face but didn't rush. That was her gift. She let silence settle without trying to fix it. I read it once, then again, just to be sure. Celeste was contesting the will. The term they used, undue influence. As if I'd hovered over our mother's bed and whispered bribes into her morphine dreams. As if being the one who stayed, who cooked, who sat beside her when the night nurse missed a shift, somehow disqualified me from being believed. Callie reached for the tin of crackers she kept in my cupboard and asked, calm as ever, "Do you have anything concrete?" I didn't answer, just pushed back from the table, my knee creaking louder than the chair, and walked down the hall to the small cabinet in my office. The one Mom and I had refinished together the summer before my grad school internship. Its drawer still stuck on humid days, and tonight was no exception. I yanked once, twice, then slid it open. The red folder sat where I'd left it, labeled in my mother's handwriting, Addendum 3. Inside, notarized letters, printouts of bank statements Celeste had forgotten to mention, a timeline Mom had drafted herself with help from her estate attorney, and one handwritten note, signed and dated, saying she feared being pushed into a care facility against her will. I sat on the edge of the bed and let the folder rest on my knees. A memory surfaced, unprompted. Lillian Poe, Mom's night nurse, telling me her son was looking for work. I had called in a favor, connected him to the state archive lab. I never mentioned it, didn't think it mattered. Now, maybe it did. I dialed the law clinic's number from the magnet on my fridge. The woman on the other end had a soft southern lilt and asked all the right questions. When I hung up, the sun had gone, and only the soft kitchen light lit the folder in my lap. This isn't just a will, it's her voice. She seals the red folder, smooths the label. Addendum 3. They wanted a fight. I brought the record. Celeste had a soft lavender coat and trembling voice when she greeted the press. I had documents and a sensible pair of shoes. The courthouse steps were crowded, though the November chill kept most people clutching their coats shut. I stayed to the side, half in the shadow of the rotunda, watching her pose beside the flagpole. Her voice carried enough to be caught on every local mic. I only did what I thought was best for Mom, she said, blinking slowly, like grief was something that needed stage direction. I stepped forward when the journalist with the navy scarf turned toward me. I didn't speak right away, just handed over the envelope I'd sealed the night before, copies of bank transfers, notarized letters, and a printout of the hospice nurse's formal complaint. The journalist's eyebrows lifted slightly as she skimmed the top page. "Thank you," she said, voice neutral but sharp-edged. Inside the courtroom, the wood smelled faintly of lemon oil and old paper. I sat 2 rows behind Celeste, close enough to hear her whisper to her lawyer, but far enough that I didn't have to answer when she glanced back. She went first. Her attorney laid out the original will, dated 6 months earlier, and Celeste recited the familiar refrain. I was uninvolved. I only returned when it suited me. I had pressured our mother. Then came my turn. I stood, handed the judge the new will, signed, notarized, and witnessed, dated just 4 weeks before Mom died. I said little. The documents spoke for themselves. Then I reached into my coat pocket, felt the soft corner of the scarf labeled J.E., and squeezed it once before stepping back. Judge Ralston cleared his throat and asked if there were any witnesses. That's when Lillian Poe stood. She wore plain clothes, no makeup, but her presence filled the room. "I was Mrs. Ellis's night nurse," she said calmly. "I witnessed her daughter Celeste raise her voice, wave a checkbook in front of her face, and push for a realtor visit while Mrs. Ellis still had pneumonia." She paused. "Mary Beth never asked for anything. She just read aloud to her." The room shifted. A low murmur spread like static. Celeste's husband stared at the floor. Then the judge nodded to the AV clerk. The screen flickered to life. My mother's face filled the monitor. Her voice was thin but certain. I was tired, not confused. I changed it because I couldn't watch Celeste sell the house beneath me. Celeste, the silence. A woman in the crowd sighed. She picked the wrong daughter to silence. By the time we pulled into Renfield again, the porch light had already turned on. Like the house remembered me before I remembered myself. The sky was sliding into that soft blue pink between day and night, and the maple in the front yard rustled just enough to make the wind chimes tinkle like distant silverware. Callie parked at the curb, and we sat for a moment in the quiet. Neither of us said anything until I opened the door and stepped out. The porch steps creaked under my weight, the same way they always had. I ran my hand over the rail out of habit, feeling the familiar notches from summers long gone. The scarf was still in my coat pocket, folded the same way since court. I hadn't touched it since that day, but it was warm now, carrying the heat of everything I hadn't said. Callie joined me on the swing, offering a thermos of tea she'd packed just in case. We didn't sip it right away. Just listened. To the tree creaking, to a dog barking 2 houses down, to the steady hum of a town settling in for the evening. Mrs. Jacobs appeared at the edge of the yard, cardigan buttoned to her chin, a plate wrapped in foil in her hands. "Joan always shared biscuits with us," she called gently. "Thought maybe you'd like a slice of pie." I met her halfway down the walk. "Thank you," I said, and meant it more than she probably knew. Back inside, while I put the pie in the fridge, Callie lingered near the old armchair by the fire. She bent down, tugged something from between the cushion and the frame. "This was tucked in your mom's wallet lining," she said, holding out a soft envelope. "Didn't look like something for strangers to sort through." I recognized the handwriting before I even unfolded it. "To my silent warrior," the envelope read. I opened it alone, sitting on the porch swing with the chimes at my back. The letter was short. No flowery words, no long-winded regrets. Just this: "You always were the strongest, even when they pretended not to see. I hope one day you realize you didn't need their praise to matter. Some truths aren't spoken, they're lived, and you lived it right. I saw it all." I exhaled, let the silence sit beside me. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the scarf, and draped it gently across the porch railing. She knew, I thought, and that was enough. The wind chimes hum softly. The porch light flickers once, like a nod. No words needed, just to be heard at last. The house didn't welcome me with words. It didn't need to. A porch light flickering gently, a wind chime swaying in rhythm with memory, and the quiet presence of a letter were more than enough. In the end, it wasn't about who spoke loudest or stood in the spotlight. It was about who stayed when no one asked, who listened when no one noticed. Kindness doesn't always arrive with applause. Sometimes it waits, quietly, and proves itself when we least expect it. Like the porch light that glows even before we reach the door, love, real, unspoken love, has a way of waiting for us to find our way back. If this story found a place in your heart, perhaps it's time to look around and thank the ones who've been there, steady and silent all along.